Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
Dan Kent, I cannot start off the MuseCast cracking up laughing.
Hey, you know what?
Not knowing why.
That's because every time that we start an episode, I always do this to get you going. You know what I just realized? Hold everything. Stop it. I'm so unprofessional. This is so unprofessional. Just a second.
Is that your robe?
It's my flannel. It's my writing flannel. And, I probably shouldn't have like my laundry all over the place. This is a professional operation.
Yes. Professional operation indeed, that we keep very real and very low brow. So. Correct. Oh my gosh, my eyes are watering. A, from laughing at your goofiness, because you're just a goofy man. And B, from I don't have allergies, but apparently I have them this year. So yay.
Yeah. You know what, Shawna? Seriously, I did not really have allergies until I turned like 35. Then I started to react this time of year. So it could develop late. So
yes, one of the joys of aging, indeed.
Yeah, there's so many joys of aging, aren't there?
So many joys.
Oh, man.
You young people, just you wait. So many joys. Okay, so I'm wearing glasses today because literally my eyes are just watering. And then Dan with his magic fingers, and I'm a goner. Okay, Dan, so this was Easter weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Do you and Barb do anything? Do you have any traditions or do anything in particular for Easter?
We really don't. We really like little traditions and stuff, but we don't really have anything special for Easter. But I tell you what, I did though is, I was not on stage. You had to work this weekend, so you were pushing the plow, throughout the weekend. I did not have any significant responsibilities, so I was able to just be a vegetable all weekend. And there are times this weekend where I found myself just staring at my bookshelf for 10-15 minutes while jazz music was playing. And it was great. Because so much of my work is deep cognitive work.
Yes.
And so it feels really good to just let the engine cool for a while and just not think of anything. So I did a lot of nothing, which was great.
That is great. And I think it's necessary. I think it's part of that Sabbath rest, just, refreshing your body and your mind. You need that. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. We don't have traditions per se for Easter, and I do like to have little traditions with our family because I didn't grow up with that kind of stuff really. But I would say I think this year, coming off of a pretty big move for my family and then my husband's work schedule, so he's every other weekend on off, and this was an on weekend for him. So poor guy came into service after just working a 12 or 13 hour shift.
Wow.
So I'm like, did you snore where anyone could hear you? Or were you stay alert?
Oh man.
So it was a pretty low key, after all the work was done for me, it was pretty low key, which I'm good with. It puts me in a more reflective mindset. So
I have a question for you. When I was growing up, my mom and I, we were inconsistent with kind of traditional type stuff. She definitely tried really hard to give me fun Easters, and it was very secular with the eggs and stuff like that. But it was very inconsistent, and I thought that we had traditions even though they were inconsistent. But then I saw some families and they have so many little traditions that just structures their lives, and there's something really neat about that. And you had talked about wanting to have traditions in your family and that you didn't have that so much growing up. What do you think that does for a family and for kids to have those types of things?
That's a great question. My hope is that it gives them a sense of foundation. No matter what, we always do A, B, or C, and I have learned from my kids that they actually begin to look forward to those things because it's a guaranteed time where the busyness is shut out and the focus is one another and the tradition or task at hand.
Yeah.
And I thought it was just important to me, but I have found that it's pretty important to my kids as well. And so I think that's what it does. I think it shows like, hey, you are important. And so everything else can just wait because we're going to do this together because it matters and you're valuable and you're important. Now, I could be reading way more into it for my own reasons, but that's what it is.
I do that.
And I feel like for my kids as well, I feel like they get a sense of that as well.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I just think it's so good. I think for the reasons that you mentioned, and but it like just that structure, like it's kind of like what's an example? Okay, so like the show Seinfeld. They go to the cafeteria. I mean, it's the same cafeteria every time, but the conversations are different. Right. But like that cafeteria, that's part of the structure of the relationship between Jerry and his friends. And it's kind of like you need to have these little structures and these predictable kind of things, these contexts where then people can, be unique and stuff, but you just have to provide that. Otherwise, I think that just facilitates bonding in a way that without that, there's just chaos and it's a lot harder to bond. And so it's a good thing. I come from the school of overthinking also, so I'm probably overthinking it as well. So,
but I do think they're great. And I think they can be really meaningful. And I think depending on your family dynamic, they can take on, different personas per se. Yeah. Like I think they can be really meaningful if that's what's valuable to you and your family. Mm-hmm. And so I think they are important. And I think the consistency is important because what I don't want my kids to ever wonder is, is this going to be a time when there's just like, there's not enough space or not enough time or not enough energy to do the thing that we normally do. I never want that for them. Although, I mean, I'm raising them to live in the real world. Like, yes, disappointments happen and yes, unexpected things occur, but I definitely want them to understand commitment and consistency and the value of together time, so.
Yeah.
We're on a whole nother MuseCast, Dan.
That's right. We haven't even done the summary yet.
I haven't even done the summary. Yeah. Okay. You have really two to kind of like pull from or integrate, or because they kind of flow. I mean, Good Friday does flow into Easter in case anyone was wondering.
Right.
So you have the option to kind of just, hone in on Easter or pull from Good Friday or do a combo or whatever. You have the freedom, Dan. That's what I'm saying to you.
Well, we called this little 2-part Good Friday Easter set. We called it Darkness into Light, and that's basically what it is. Very standard. Again, it's like you're not going to hear anything shockingly new at the Good Friday Easter service, but it's just important in the structure of our lives and in our theology and in our spiritual walks to keep coming back to this very predictable kind of story and these truths, because they really do ground our faith. And so that's what we did. And Greg on Friday talked about Good Friday, and he said it should be called, what did he say? It's something like Dark Friday, I think is what he proposed. Yeah. And because it really is, that's where Jesus and the disciples and the whole kind of story to that point reaches its low point in terms of hopelessness. And it doesn't seem like God is going to do what God promised to do. And it seems like Jesus was not who Jesus claimed to be. And all of the miracles and all of the authority he spoke with just seems to dissolve into nothing on the cross. And there's just like this very justified, profound despair in the disciples. And that was Good Friday. And Greg talked a little bit about how we live in a Good Friday world and how so much of our lives are that. It's just this profound disappointment, and it doesn't seem like God is who the Bible says God is, and we're still in that sort of darkness, and the Bible empathizes with that on a profound level. And Greg shared some verses from the Old Testament where David is experiencing this profound sense of abandonment from God, and other times in the Old Testament, the Israelites had experienced this as well, and that's part of living in a not God world where the world is being run by an enemy of God. But then it transitioned from there into the Easter service, where you have the resurrection, and the resurrection sort of turns all of that darkness on its head. And the Apostle Paul says in Romans 8:18, I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing to the glory that is to be revealed in us. And so Paul, even though he's under persecution, even though he's suffering, even though he's been on the run, he's been shipwrecked, he's not like thriving. He's not living his best life now. He's experiencing a lot of hardship, but yet he still feels this profound, justified sense of hope that none of this stuff, this darkness, this woe, none of this stuff, it looks really bad. And when Jesus was on the cross, there's no reason to think it wasn't as bad as it looks. But now, because of the resurrection, we know that it's not as bad as it looks. This is just a flea. This is a wood tick. It's just this temporary sort of thing that is it's insignificant compared to the glory that is to come. And so it's just such a great reversal story, and we live in that, and we still mostly live in the hope of that reversal in the same way that the Apostle Paul lived, in the same way that the disciples lived, in the same way that the church has lived for the last couple thousand years. It's a tough hope to live in because of all the evil and the suffering that we see, but it's no worse now than it was for the disciples, and they continue to hold on to that hope. And the promise is that as bad as things seem now, it's not going to be. It's not even worth comparing to how great it's going to be with God. So that's sort of my sermon. Another way to look at it, Shawna, really quick, is the difference between Good Friday and Easter. Good Friday is kind of like being an LA Lakers fan, and Easter is like being a Timberwolves fan. So
you're the worst. Oh yes, many things put to death on Good Friday. Oh, but there is tomorrow coming. There is a Sunday coming. I'm telling you right now. All right. I'll let you have that one, Dan. I can't really refute it. One of the things, there were so many aspects of this weekend that were unique for us at Woodland Hills. I mean, this was our first Easter service since the pandemic. Like, remember last year we didn't have a full person Easter service, and there was a lot to consider with that. The fact that Greg unfortunately got sick, like that was a big thing.
Yeah. Oh, what a bummer. Oh, that's such a bummer.
I know.
And what was your
he just couldn't, like, he would have wanted to.
He sent us a message. He sent the pastor team or the executive team a message. I couldn't understand a word he was saying. He couldn't even, he sounded like a frog in the last seconds of his life. Just kind of like, it was terrible. So I hope he's feeling better now, but
yeah.
Well, hey, let me ask you this. I don't mean to interrupt, but it seemed like, because I was monitoring YouTube, so I wasn't present. Yeah. But it seemed like it was a pretty full house.
It was so full.
Really?
So, yeah. So just a little peek behind the curtains. And I don't know if this is interesting to people or not, but just here you go. This is the MuseCast. So our auditorium can hold, I think, like 1,100. Anyway, our auditorium can hold way more chairs than we currently have in there. And we were strategic about that because of COVID. When we started coming back for services, we put fewer chairs than the auditorium could handle because we wanted to make sure that we could distance the rows and stuff like that. So there are, let's just say, I'm going to round it out. Let's just say there's 700 chairs in the auditorium. And we really thought, considering like the crowd size and the fact that we live stream, we hadn't been filling out those chairs. And so we figured with the extra chairs already allotted in the auditorium. Plus we had an overflow area in the gathering area that could seat quite a few people. We thought we would be good to go. No, we were not good to go. So there were about 900 some odd in the auditorium. And I think around like 200 in the gathering area. And people were so sweet. They were trying to help, like they were grabbing chairs and just like plopping them in the auditorium. And so thank God a fire marshal didn't come through, because that would not, I mean, it was just, it's a lovely problem to have. It was a very
totally
full house in.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, the follow-up question to that is, what were people's reactions when Greg wasn't there? Did people seem okay with it, or good? Good.
There wasn't a mass exodus at all.
Oh, that's so great.
Kind of settled in, and fortunately and also unfortunately, the message from 2018 was still like uber relevant.
Right. Yeah. Isn't that's so sad? He's talking about how bad everything is with the wars and the violence, and it's like, still the same.
Still the same. Yeah. Still there. So
I'm telling you why. I've been part of Woodland Hills since the 90s, but I've been on staff just for a few years, and that's one thing that I didn't really know. I didn't really notice as just a congregant is just how understanding and how persistent and how consistent the people of Woodland Hills are, and just how gracious they are, and it doesn't surprise me, and that they were just rolled with the punches, and I just think that's awesome. So,
it was really fascinating. If you could have been in Dan, you've been in the gathering area for a variety of things. There were just chairs everywhere and just people just everywhere. And they were just, was it their preference? I'm sure not, but everyone was so gracious and so great. It was really beautiful.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. And so as I reflect on all of that, and then I reflect on the Easter message, and even spilling back over into Good Friday, just the reality of this was just one of those moments in time when I just needed to be reminded. Yeah, we live in a Good Friday world, but there is hope because of what is coming. And then what it caused me to do, and what I want to ask you, Dan, this is really kind of one of the only questions I have for you today, is we're just kind of, there's only so much you can say, right, about Easter.
Right.
As we're just reflecting on it for our community. Could you imagine? We have the benefit of hindsight, quite a bit of hindsight. We know the end of the story, in that we know that Easter is coming. We know Sunday is coming. We know that Good Friday was not the end. And we know that today, amidst all the pain and suffering and frustrations and anger, just all the crud going on, we know that this is not the end. And that's the hope that we have in Jesus. And that's what Greg was sharing with us. But could you imagine being a part of his inner circle back then, Dan? Yeah. Knowing that you heard what he said, but you still had expectations. You had to have had expectations, right, of what it would mean for Messiah to come. And then imagine seeing it all just literally die before you. On a I think so many times we just forget, because we know, well, yes, he died and then he was resurrected. But in that moment, they didn't fully know that. They weren't really comprehending that. And it was still so painful to them. Yeah. So I want to ask you about that, but I also want to say, to give you a moment to think, I love that we started out Sunday service still somber. We started out Sunday service, in the experience of not yet knowing that the tomb was empty. I think that was a really powerful place to put ourselves in, because so many times we can easily just kind of bypass it, right? We can be yep, Sunday's coming, Easter, resurrection, without really fully entering into the pain and the fear that must have been there for those who were wait a second, I thought he was going to save us. Yeah.
It's hard to enter into it when you already know what's going to happen. Yeah. And yet, on the other hand, I do think a lot of people do enter into it all the time. And that, I've seen so many times where people lose their faith because God did not rescue their child from cancer, or God did not protect their house from the storm, or whatever. And it's a very similar situation where I have these expectations of what God will do, and God doesn't, and therefore that God doesn't exist. And at the very least, I think the Easter story should push back against that assumption. It should push back against our. Part of me really thinks that a lot of spiritual development is just overcoming that tendency that we have to have expectations of what God will do. And because what happens is when we attach our faith to what God will do, our faith is in serious jeopardy, because God is very unpredictable, and he's intentionally unpredictable because he wants us to trust him, not just the results. Plus, he's engaging in this spiritual warfare with an enemy, and he has to be unpredictable. And this is why you see over and over and over again in the Old Testament, you have, and in the New Testament, where God is always challenging expectations, from Peter saying that I will stick with you no matter what. And Jesus is like, no, you won't. You expect that you will, but you won't. Yeah. And you have in the book of Job where, at the end, when God shows up to Job and his three friends, he just goes off on Job about, where were you when I did this?
Where were you?
Where were you when I did that? Where were you? How could you know what I'm going to do? And again, that's those expectations. I expect that God will do this. Don't have those expectations. Just trust God. And so, yeah, I think I think people enter into that Good Friday mindset. It's the challenge is to transition into the Easter mindset from that. And yeah, so I part of me can't imagine what the disciples felt, but then part of me deeply resonates with what the disciples felt.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to give you space to come up with your nugget, because
wait. Can we call it an Easter egg this week instead of a nugget?
Let's call it an Easter egg. Is it a dyed egg? Is it just a plain egg? Is it a plastic egg?
It's beautiful. Yes.
It's glorious.
Yeah.
All right. We knew that today's conversation maybe wouldn't go as long, but I still think it's valid what we're talking about, because so many people, without realizing it, are living day to day in a Good Friday moment.
Yeah.
Where they're not seeing the reality of what they hope for or what they expect. And I think it's important for us to remember and to encourage folks that just because your particular expectation isn't met does not mean that God's not at work. Because it was no one's expectation, no matter how many times he said it or alluded to it, it was no one's expectation that Jesus would actually die before their very eyes. That was not the expectation. The expectation was, something else grand was going to happen to kind of solve it all. And yet God was at work. As painful as the experience was, God was at work. And Jesus relates to that painfulness of feeling like the expectation is not being met. So I think it's important that we are having this conversation, and just to remind and encourage people, especially given the fact that we are still living many times in a Good Friday situation. But yeah, conversation's a little shorter, not by much, but a little shorter, but still poignant and still helpful, I believe. So Indeed. All of that being said, Dan Kent, what is your Easter egg for the MuseCast community?
Yeah. Well, that was all really well said. I think, one thing that I have two Easter eggs. They're kind of related. So
like it.
The first part is that I think that Good Friday and Easter really focusing on those two really means to focus on the grief of living in a Good Friday world, and learning how to kind of really truly embrace that and to live in that, as Greg said, and to truly lament, and then living also in an Easter world where we're living that hope that the resurrection means everything that we're told that it means. We also have to live into that hope. So you have the living in grief and living in hope. And what I have found is that a lot of times people get really good at one or the other of those. They're really good at living in the hope, and they tend to deny the evil and the suffering, and or they get so overwhelmed in the evil and the suffering that they lose sight of the hope. And I think that being Christians is to get good at living into both of those, not denying the evil, but also not forgetting the hope, and learning how to and this is the second part of my nugget, or Easter egg, excuse me, learning how to let the Good Friday world and also the hope of Easter kind of speak into every moment of our day. Like, what does it mean? Even as I'm driving to work or parking my car or waiting to get my hair cut or whatever, like what does the story of Easter mean for those moments? And because otherwise, we can let the Easter story be just that, a story, instead of a reality that affects the situation that I am currently in at all times. When Jesus rose from the dead, that changed reality in a deep way. And we may not know it, and people may not know it, but it did. And I think the invitation is to begin to live into that hope, and to not do it just as a story, but to do it as part of my self-identity, to do it as part of how I look at everyone I meet and how I look at every moment that I exist in.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so well said. I love your two Easter eggs, Dan.
Easter eggs. Yay.
Don't call them nuggets. The only thing I would add is to look at what Jesus did in that moment before his death, when he cried out, like, my God, why have you forsaken me? And I think we can learn from that. Like, Dan is right. Like, it's a both and. Like, we live in Good Friday and we have hope, and also live into the Easter Sunday, the resurrection. He is not here. He has risen. However, our reality doesn't always match that yet, because there are other forces at play. But in those dark moments, even Jesus cried out to God in complete vulnerability. And I think we can do the same. We should do the same. We can be real with what we're feeling and experiencing in those dark moments, and know, because Jesus truly wasn't forsaken. I mean, God was still there. It just felt that way. And we all know what that feels like, right? Like, just to feel like he's so absent, he's so gone, he's so silent, but he is absolutely right there. And then lean into the proclamation that he is not here. He is risen. And so because of that, like Dan said, it changed the game. In the midst of our struggle, in the midst of our confusion, in the midst of our despair, in the midst of all the hellish things that we encounter and see in the world, he is alive and well and at work. And we just lean into that, and it just helps. That's all I'm going to say. It helps.
Yes,
right?
It does.
It helps.
Yes.
So that's that. Dan, Easter, we've gone through that. And so we enter back in next week. Are we back into Sermon on the Mount?
Yep. Back into Sermon on the Mount. I think we're going to start talking about anxiety when Jesus teaches about do not be anxious. And so we're going to start looking at that. And I'm really looking forward to this next part of the series. So are
we still treasure hunters, or is it different?
Well, I think it's different. I think what is it called? I don't know what it's called. Shoot, bummer.
That's all right.
It might still be part of treasure hunters, though. I can't remember how we broke it up. Okay. But yeah.
Well, that just gives you guys something to look forward to. Tune in this coming weekend to the services, and then circle back with us next week as we continue the conversation, and catch us on podcast if you like as well. Have a wonderful week, you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. We super appreciate you all.